Hey everyone, Drew Bees Apiary here. Today is August 2nd. Early in the morning here. It's a little before 9. We are at the original yard, and today what we're going to be working on is really just feeding. I may have mentioned this in the last video. I have to go back and check, but this time of the year, at least here in Georgia in August, there's really not a whole lot to do. To be honest, leaving the bees alone is probably the best thing you can do. In most of my yards, we're going to be doing that. Really, the only thing that I need to do at all my yards today is feed sugar, which we'll go into that in a second. And I think there's 2 hives at one of the yards that were not queen right and hadn't been for almost a month. They were in the process of building cells, and we're going to go look into them today and see how they are. See if they've made some new queens or not. But really, again, this is the month of August. You know, we're in a dearth. We've been in a dearth for a little over a month, at least in my area. Bees haven't really been bringing in a whole lot of natural things, and you know, we did a decent harvest. I wouldn't call it a great harvest. We did a decent harvest here in early June. Like I said, got that 360 some pounds of honey, which is fine. Expect a lot more, but ever since harvesting, you know, as a beekeeper, you got to think, what are your bees going to need getting through winter? And fortunately, here in Georgia, you know, the bees don't need a whole lot to make it through winter as far as reserves, because we do have such mild winters, especially last year's. But, you know, I'm looking at this as giving them something to do. Again, not that sugar is cheap, but sugar is still cheaper than, you know, you hoping and crossing your fingers for a good fall flow, which, hey, I am, but, you know, it's just not guaranteed. So I would rather feed them, give them something to do, and reevaluate come late September, early October. See if we need to pull some honey before we button them up for winter. But right now, yeah, really, I mean, all it is, like I said, this isn't really much of a worry for swarming this time of the year. It's really all about the dearth and the bugs. Like I said, I've been fighting, and I'll show you later in this video some of my thoughts on specifically wax moths. I can mention some with high beetles, but really this summer has been bad for wax moths for me, especially my drawn comb that was in my supers, keeping that stuff protected, which is always a battle, and so we'll go into that. But for right now, I'm going to be checking on a few of these hives. It's kind of hard to tell, but you can kind of see a shallow box on the top. Those are those internal hive feeders that I don't really like them all that much, but I'm using them just because I had them. I'm okay with using them in a yard like this that's small, where I have one for every hive, but I probably wouldn't use them if you just had a few. It's too costly, and it's too costly to buy a bunch of them for all your hives. And it's just, you know, it's just one of those things where there's easier methods if you're going to feed your bees externally, using like an inverted bucket, which I can show you that too. There's plenty of videos on how to make those, but I usually externally feed, and so that's just easier for me. Those things just cost too much money. I don't think they work so great. They're hard to clean, and I'm using them because I have them. So without further ado, we'll go do that. We'll check on how those are doing. I just got to check on inside the box, not really do like an actual inspection. I just got to check something in 2 of these real quick, and then I might be moving one of these hives, this little red one, to a different yard today, just to space things out. So I will put this on time lapse, and we will get to work. All right, I know that wasn't a very long time lapse, but as you see, it wasn't a whole lot going on. Mainly just feeding. I did notice in these little hive top feeders, there's a reason they're up here inverted on their side. Those are from 3 of those are from 3 of the hives that they weren't working out so great. The problem with those hive top feeders, folks, if you've never used them or you're on the fence of using one, is the idea is it's supposed to prevent bees from getting inside, and they will find a way. Like I'll grab one just to show y'all. And there's bees all over at the moment, but you'll get the idea as I'm showing it to you. So you got this it's a shallow super, right? The bottom is all plastic though, because it's basically a container for the feed that you put right here. These three that I pulled off, the reason I pulled all three of them off is because there was just a lot of dead bees on them. Either the bees find a way to like crawl through, even though you have a telescoping cover on the top, bees will find a way to crawl up the sides, find their way in, or they find a way through these little gap spaces that are supposed to be, you know, screwed in. They'll find a way to get onto the inner side, which is not great. So there was probably like, in all three of these hives, like 80 dead bees each. And you know, there's some mixed thoughts on that. Some say these are bees that are already getting old and dying, and that very well might be the case. But it also could just be bees that are just wrong place, wrong situation, and die. And any way to reduce that is better. So I've left 2 of them on there because 2 of these seem to be doing fine on the hives that they're currently on. No bees seem to be getting in and drowning. And so, I mean, all of them are empty. All these containers that I had filled about a week ago completely been drained. They drank everything, but they're just not worth it. It's much easier to talk about something else here. So these are just external feeders. Lowe's, right now I'm using Lowe's bucket. You can use any sort of paint bucket, whatever you want. Utility bucket. Basically, there's some videos on, I think I got this from Barnyard Bees, the idea, where basically he drilled some holes on the inner lip, making sure to not go through this outer lip. Look up his videos, or watch one of my previous mentionings of this. I'm pretty sure I've talked about this external feeder before, and his channel will show you more as to how to make something like this. But these are great. I'm using 2 right now. They're just inverted. The bees seem to respond pretty well to it. They go here. It doesn't waste much sugar water. There's always going to be a little bit of waste, because at the end of the day, this seal that's being made right here, there's always going to end up being some loss around this lip area down here. But overall, it's a very efficient way to quickly feed the bees and not wasting much of your time. I know no one wants to waste sugar, but at the same time, no one likes to waste time either. And these are just quick to the point. I don't have the luxury to put these very far away. If you listen to a lot of people talking about external feeders, you should put them fairly far away. I don't have the land or a spot on some of my properties to do something like that. So they're going to be in this treehouse right now, and so far it has been working pretty well. You also notice there are a bunch of empty supers, inverted on their sides. Reason for that is for the final part of this discussion, which is wax moths. I got, this is probably my first year of actually getting really affected by them, but it's also my first year of having a lot more spare supers after the honey harvest than I had previously. And the thing you want to be looking at, folks, if you're getting new into beekeeping, is with your comb, right? Here's just a standard super frame, and even though it's all drawn out wax, you can tell that if there ever was anything in it, it was probably only honey. What you want to be aware of is any of your dark spots, specifically spots that have pollen already in it or had pollen already in it. And I'll give you an example of one. In fact, I'll show you one with wax moth damage. Show you what I'm talking about. You got to be really careful when you start seeing these dark spots like this. You know, sometimes that's a spot where either brood was raised or where pollen was stored, but that's not usually the sign of nectar formerly being stored in there. And as you can see, it's kind of hard to tell, there is some wax webbing in there. So like if I go through here, pull that up, you can kind of see the wax. So there was definitely a moth that got in there at some point in time, messing around with it. There's a tiny little bit right here, but the real thing the moths want is the pollen. So on this frame that was damaged by wax moths, you can see the tunnels that they were weaving. And if you notice, this was a frame that had little spots of pollen. So when the wax moth came here and it laid its eggs, it did that because it knew that there was a food source for the baby moth, in this case little grub, to eat. Anytime you see those little brown specks, those are like fecal trails that the moth, the larva is leaving behind. But obviously this is a real problem for beekeepers, because, you know, all the hard work that the bees did can end up could get worse. I mean, obviously I caught this early enough, and the bees will salvage this. I have taken frames just like this where I carve up some of the damage they've done, put them back in the box, bees clean up just fine. It's not a big deal. You don't want to be handing the bees a frame that's loaded with grubs crawling all over it, however, or where it's totally webbed out. But like little bits of webs here and there, bees can fix that. No big deal. Yeah, it's a little inconvenient for them to have some damaged frame, but that is not the end of the world. But you got to ask yourself, what sorts of things are you going to do to protect your wax comb? Professional beekeepers will use Paramoth. I've never used any of that before. But I've also met some beekeepers that don't like using Paramoth because they said it's, you know, even there's a little bit of a gap, or if you don't use the right amount, you know, all that was for waste. The absolute best thing you can do is keep your frames cold, either in a freezer, another thing I do not have. If you do have the ability to have chest freezers or enough to hold your frames, then great. But again, folks, really the only ones you need to freeze are your frames that have pollen. If you have super frames or whatever frames you're trying to store, they've got that like dark comb that, again, if you're trying to store dark comb, especially if any residual honey in it, just be careful, because again, right here, wax moths will try to get in there, and then you got to clean it up. So if you have the ability to do that, great. The method that I tried this summer, but I did not think of one thing, is, you know, you can put your frames in a sealed, air-sealed container. Like when I harvested all my frames this summer, I froze them all. So it took me some time going through my own personal freezer, you know, to take 4 or 5 at a time, put them in there, leave them in there for a day or so, take them out, put them in the sealed container. And that's great, but you know, these moths, they can find a way. If there's even a little bit of a gap in your, whatever you're calling a sealed, like Tupperware container, they'll find a way in. And then there's nothing worse than when you've got this container and the frames are just stacked on top of each other like that, where there's just, it's so tight, there's no light getting in there. The moths do not like the light. If there's any light hitting the frame, like daylight, typically, from what I've understand and from what I've seen personally, they're probably not going to lay any eggs on the frame. All of these super boxes in here, most of them are the normal kind that don't have any of the pollen residual, but some do. But if you notice, I'm kind of spacing out the frames. So like right here in this box, I'm not putting them all tight up on each other. No, I want light to get in there. I want airflow to get in there. I want to do whatever I can to discourage the wax moth from doing anything. When I was out here just going through these today just to see how they were looking, I did see maybe like 2 wax moths. So I'm not going to say that my method is invulnerable, but most of these frames, folks, have been out here for a month and a half, 2 months. And if I have had wax moth damage, it's been very little. It's been, you know, maybe 2-3 frames. I know this isn't very many frames, this is only a few boxes worth of stuff, but just keep that in mind. If you have a way to either leave your frames in a frozen, cold environment, great. Or if you don't have the access to that, if you have somewhere exterior, if you can make like a shed that has like, see like these clear roofs right here where light can get in? You know, I know we're in a tree house, but this clear roof is great for letting light in during the day, discouraging the moths from wanting to lay eggs in here. So this is gonna be my storage area for wax frames. So just something to think about. Take care of your frames, keep feeding your bees this summer, folks. Like I said, I just want to give you a quick update on what I'm doing. Try not to disturb the bees. I know they're down there right now doing their thing, and hopefully if we keep feeding them over the next, you know, month or so, they will be in a good spot, and you know, maybe we're lucky, maybe we get a nectar flow. But me personally, I'm just, aside from hoping from that, I'm gonna be leaving these bees largely to their own now that my mite treatments are done, and it's just feed. So hope y'all have a good week. I know I kind of rambled a bit there, but hope this helped you somewhat, and hope you guys are having a good summer with your bees, if that's something you guys are working through right now. But either way, y'all take care, have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.